We've seen a conflict here for 3 years. The Minsk negotiations had been getting stuck. That there was a circular discussion about security and political implementation, and nothing was happening. The ceasefire was never being implemented. People were dying, a couple people a week would die. So getting out of that cycle of failure, basically, getting out of that, let's not call it a failure, but stagnation. Getting out of that cycle of stagnation is important. A peacekeeping force, if there were one, that had responsibility for the area, instead of Russian forces being there occupying the area, could be a way to provide security for people and provide access for Ukrainian authorities, to provide a space where you can have elections, a space where you can see the implementation of the Minsk agreements. So that's the idea behind a peacekeeping force. It's very interesting that Russia proposed a UN protection force in New York. Up until that point, Russia had not been bringing this up in New York, and in fact it said it didn't like the idea of the UN. So this is a step forward in a way, bringing it up for discussion and bringing it to the Security Council. Now, the terms of the mandate that Russia has proposed, I am concerned, would only deepen the division in Ukraine. It would be along the line of the ceasefire, not throughout the whole area. It would only protect monitors, not people. It would not give access to controlling the Russia-Ukraine border. So there's a lot of obstacles, a lot of problems with the way it was proposed. But it opens a discussion. And I hope that through that dialogue, we can talk about the idea of a genuine peacekeeping force, and one that would be focused on security throughout the entire area, one that would control the Ukrainian side of the Ukraine-Russia border, and one that would provide for the cantonment and monitoring of heavy weapons. If we do that, I think it meets all of the other conditions and allows for a political process to go forward. We're not producing our own document. There is a proposal by Russia. It is as I described. It doesn't do everything that it needs to do to bring the country together. It would actually deepen the divide. A peacekeeping force that has area security responsibility, that provides for the cantonment and monitoring of heavy weapons, and that's control of the Ukrainian side of the Ukraine-Russia border. Russia proposed this idea in New York. We're on the Security Council, Ukraine's on the Security Council, France, Germany, Japan, Sweden, others. We are talking about this. We'll talk about this in New York next week. I'll have a further bilateral meeting with my Russian counterpart sometime in October. So there will be dialogue about this. It's more important at this stage to get the principles right. I think it would be unreasonable to expect Russia to go to the United Nations and propose our position. They're not going to do that. They're going to go in and say, here's what Russia would love to see. But the fact that they did this, I think, is very interesting and should be taken seriously. They weren't talking about this in New York before. They weren't talking about a UN force before. That's now on the table as a Russian proposal. So I think that's very interesting. And I think the way we get to these questions of mandate and scope is to sit down with the Russians and talk it through. The issues driving this are not paper negotiations in New York. The issues driving it are Russia's sense that the status quo is not good for anybody. It's not good for Russia, it's not good for the people of the Donbass, it's not good for Ukraine. And if we can find a better way forward, let's work to do that. So that's how I think we get to reshaping those discussions about the mandate. We see sanctions, we see questions about security assistance for Ukraine, we see clarity, concern and clarity of information about Russia's role in all of this. President Trump telling President Putin that the U.S.-Russia relationship will not be getting better as long as this issue is not resolved. The worsening diplomatic climate between the U.S. and Russia for other reasons, our embassies and consulates and personnel. So there's a sense that we need to start finding things to build on. So I think all of those things come together to create a climate in which it's actually worth trying to solve this. Maybe one other thing I would add is I think Russia is realizing that its invasion and occupation of part of Ukraine has resulted in a Ukraine that is more unified, more nationalist, more westward looking, more anti-Russian than before. And this is clearly not something Russia intended, and I think it's having to think through how would it like to recalibrate. The topic of my conversations with Mr. Surkov are the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and safety and security for all Ukrainian citizens, regardless of ethnicity, nationality, or religion. That's what the goal is. And I think that Russia, on paper, subscribes to those goals. The Minsk process says it's restoring Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Russia itself talks about the importance of safety for Russian-speaking people. So what we need to talk about is how to do it. We got into this circular discussion in the Normandy and Minsk process. What comes first, security or political process? I'm hoping we can break out of that circular argument. If we did have a peacekeeping force, as we were just discussing, that could create time and space for moving forward on the political steps under Minsk. Ukraine does have responsibilities agreed to under the Minsk agreements about, for instance, elections, about special status, about amnesty, things that the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian parliament already passed in the past. And I understand that it can't be implemented when Ukraine can't even access this territory. But if we can change this discussion, we have security in the area, we have access into those areas, then Ukraine will have to follow through on those things too, as it said it would. I don't have any doubt about it. I just recognize it couldn't happen until now, or until there is security. But once we have that, I think that would be the follow through. I'd say that there's more on the table now that that we can work with. It creates opportunity. And I hope that we're creative and determined and able to take advantage of it. But there's a lot in play right now. It's something we should work with. Russia's already invaded Ukraine. It's already occupying territory. There's already a hot war going on. What we need to do is stop the conflict, restore the territory to Ukrainian sovereignty, protect all of the people. A peacekeeping force is a potential way to help do that. That's what we need to be doing. So threatening to, that's not threatening, but suggesting that there might be a spread of the conflict elsewhere is really not constructive. We want to be preventing conflict. So that's the first part of it. The second part is that every country has a right to self-defense. And I think Secretary Mattis, when he was here a couple of weeks ago, said it very clearly that a country's defense of its own territory is not a threat to anybody unless that person is an aggressor. So as long as there's no aggressor, there's no threat. And it is very reasonable for the Ukrainians to want to provide for their own self-defense and to have the best equipment possible in doing so. It's something that is being very seriously considered, and I think it's a very reasonable desire on the Ukrainian side to have the best weapons possible for its own self-defense. My focus at the moment is on giving an impetus to the Minsk negotiations, the Minsk process, supporting and working with the Normandy process as well. And so that is focused on eastern Ukraine. I did, in the course of our scheduling the meetings with Mr. Surkov, make clear that our position is that Crimea and eastern Ukraine are identical. There's no difference in terms of Russia's invasion, occupation. In the case of Crimea, they've claimed to annex the territory. We don't accept either one. And my hope is that if we can make progress anywhere, let's just take it. We should make progress, but that doesn't change our views about Crimea at all. We don't have a format for that right now, like we have the Minsk format. So what I've been tasked to do is to work on giving an impetus to the Minsk process, the Normandy process, to see if we can make progress. But that is different from making any kind of judgment about our view on Crimea. Of course, we have sanctions in place because of the occupation and claimed annexation of Crimea. Of course, those sanctions are not going away. Even if Russia does that, if we are successful in seeing the Donbas restored to Ukrainian sovereignty through whatever mechanisms we develop, sanctions in place because of Crimea remain in place.